It's a spectacular paper and a spectacular presentation. And I wonder if before I open the floor for discussion, that if you'll give me and Peter and I the authority to write a letter to Calestis immediately after the meeting to say how much we have appreciated the piece, and that I will then say that Peter did a pretty good job, not quite as good as he would have, but almost, and that we wish him all the best with his health. Is that all right? Okay. Right. Yes, Anne, and then Charles.
Well, I mean, it was a terrific paper. It's almost too bad we didn't have it earlier in the proceedings, because it added a lot of meat to much of what we've been discussing. This will not have been lost on you, Partha, but it really helps with our conversation of last night, which is not just that we're paternalistically going to help the poor Africans, but that there are a certain number of things they need to be investing in themselves. And Calestis has given us a list of those kinds of things, the capacity to embrace innovation, to work more cooperatively and regionally towards these outcomes. So I think it was utterly outstanding and helps our case quite considerably.
Right, thank you. And let me add my congratulations on the job you did in presenting that. It was terrific. It's hard to disagree with anything that Calestis has said in his paper, and it seems that he's covered a lot of material in a very satisfactory way. But at the end of it, I come away with a feeling that there's a big piece that's missing there. And the piece that's missing is the interaction between Africa and the rest of the world. The only way that appears is via the negative impacts of, for example, the introduction of the Nile perch or water hyacinth in Lake Victoria. So there's a negative impact from species coming into Africa from the rest of the world. But the African agricultural sector is completely integrated into the rest of the markets of Europe in particular when it comes down to horticultural products, and other markets when it comes to things like maize and so on. And there is a two-way flow of species that has consequences for well-being in the rest of the world. So the reason this is interesting and important is that it provides the rest of the world with a powerful incentive to do something about that problem. It's not just an African issue. Of course, there's incentives to people in Africa to invest in their own development, but there's an even stronger incentive to the rest of the world. And we pointed out a couple of those issues in our paper, one with respect to land races and wild crop relatives, and the other with respect to pathogens in particular. But I think adding that story, connecting Africa to the rest of the world, will provide a double motivation for investing in the environmentally sustainable development of the rural sectors.
Yep, it is indeed a great paper. I'm just wondering if I can add a bit in the climate change biodiversity connections. As is rightly noted, the Lake Chad example from Calestis is really good, and it's actually a reflection of the fact that the fact that Lake Chad has been drying out is a reflection of the fact that the last 60 years have seen a really systematic drying trend over parts of the Sahel, especially in the west. And that's a kind of evaporation basin that's reflecting that. I think about that quite a bit as a climate person, not least because of some of these 4 billion people are supposed to be going to be living. A lot of them in Nigeria, a region that's definitely part of the region that's been getting systematically drier. And the models have real difficulty agreeing, shall we say, on future climate change in Africa, but they are beginning to agree. They're not so good at agreeing in West Africa, so we have a very uncertain future for them on monsoon system there. But one thing we can say vis-a-vis diversity is that the historical changes in vegetation cover, especially in that part of West Africa, are thought to be causally connected to the climate trends, the drying trend. And this is why there's a big initiative for the sort of Great Green Wall of Africa, and why there's already good initiatives to try and revegetate and parts of the Western Sahel. So that clearly has a biodiversity climate interaction, right? And it's actually well understood that in that region the coupling between vegetation cover and the climate state is strong. So I'm wondering, I'm trying to turn this to the positive, and I'm thinking particularly about where are the sort of synergies and co-benefits where you'd benefit biodiversity and you'd help the climate and in turn the agricultural productive potential of parts of Africa. West Africa is certainly, and the monsoon region there, West African monsoon region is a key area for that. I think in the Congo Basin, it's a slightly different narrative, but we heard in the paper about, the danger that people might conceivably start deforesting to put up oil palm plantations like people in other parts of the world have. I think there may be a way out of that trouble, but partly helped by the fact that the whole climate thing is bringing about a valuation, albeit just a carbon valuation on tropical forests and tropical peatlands. But if the right kind of system can be put in place to protect the forest that actually engages and financially benefits the local people, then I think you can build an economic model for preservation and protection of the forests in the Congo that would benefit biodiversity and would benefit the climate and would benefit the local people. That said, given all due consideration of the political situation in the region and knowing the groups of people trying to work there to bring those kind of things to fruition, it's currently a much harder place to work and to make those projects fly than is seen, for example, in parts of Southeast Asia, where the projects are really getting off the ground in Indonesia, Kalimantan, for example. So just wanted to put some of that sort of climate and biodiversity interconnection space out there.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to just pick up on this point of the motivation for investment from two perspectives. We've got to remember, of course, let's remind ourselves that we're dealing with 54 countries. We do tend to slip into this attitude, oh, it's Africa, but it's not Africa. It's 54 countries we're dealing with, so we're dealing with immense diversity. And one of the things, I loved Callistus' paper and the way he thinks through these things. I'm concerned about this issue which keeps coming back as to what's going to happen to African agriculture. Is it going to industrialize, or is it going to remain predominantly a smallholder agricultural system? And that seems to be one of the critical issues that we keep coming back to in these debates, and I don't think there's an answer. I think perhaps we should spend a little more focus on that. If it goes down the route of industrialization, and the investment attraction is clearly there for China, for the Middle East, there are many inroads into African countries by these two major blocs, because they're desperate for food as well, and will continue to be desperate for food for the future. Then, of course, we're faced with this potential prospect of displacement. And then we're into the discussion about the migration of people, and particularly young people, which we see already, and the sensitivities that brings to this part of the world in terms of migration across the Mediterranean, not just from North Africa, but from the sub-Saharan countries. So there's a complexity here which is, yes, it's touching on biodiversity issues in a big way. Is it going to industrialize, or is it going to retain much of the smallholder structure that we've seen in the past? And it's been one of the motivations for our own interests in trying to look at ways in which one can build up the small communities, the smart village concept, which might then provide mechanisms and reasons for people to actually stay in those villages and develop their own enterprises. And we've seen examples of that where young people have started to go back, where they see and recognize that there is an opportunity to do something and to look at new initiatives. So that's my first point. But my second point has been highlighted for me on a number of occasions where I have met people who are deeply focused on bioenergy. So in the energy sector, which drives so many things, and not least biodiversity loss, in the energy sector, we have two very big components at the moment which are not speaking to each other. The first is the group who see the sun as the answer to the future, and clearly that is a big factor. There's another group which says it's not the sun, it's engineering, it's agriculture, it's growing biomass. So we have the bioenergy people, and we have the more engineering-orientated people. And so the bioenergy people who are becoming very active and very influential, and I, just a few months ago, I attended a significant meeting in the Netherlands where they had drawn together a number of people from across the globe to look at this point in particular. The Netherlands is interested in it for one particular reason. Rotterdam is a major oil processing center. What are they going to use all that structure for when we no longer use the oil? So they're looking at alternatives, and bioenergy is the focus. So biomass now is brought into a particular situation because people see biofuels in particular as one of the important ways forward until we have electrification of transport and so on. But in between times, bioenergy is critical. So the two main areas that are seen as being critical for bioenergy are number one, African countries, and number two, South American countries. And I think we need to just give some further thought to the way in which this also is going to bring its impact in connection with biodiversity and ecosystem services. So I want to try to just highlight those two additional areas, Partha, in the course of the discussion about Africa.